Well, welcome back to the My First Rodeo podcast, the show that asks really cool, interesting, and famous people about the various firsts on their paths to success. Today is no exception. We have an amazing person who's done tremendous things in the comedic community. His name is Fred Pozin, and he was for over 30 years the owner of a Comedy Zone club, part of that Comedy Zone franchise. You may have one in your community. Really a Class A, 5-star comedy club in Jacksonville, Florida, that has seen some great comedians at various stages of their career. Some who are road dogs simply at the peak of their career when that's the type of club they aspire to perform in. But some on their ways up, like Chris Rock, and some maybe like former Saturday Night Live comedians who were on a different part of their career path that were finding their way to make money and to monetize their success by performing in clubs like the Comedy Zone. But so many of them became loyal to Fred over the years because he looked after them, he paid them on time, he honored his promises. A lot of young comedians. I wasn't young when I got started, but was new to comedy. And he was very generous with his time in terms of including us in workshops, giving us an opportunity to meet with the headliners. And then when he thought we were ready, giving us an opportunity to open for the headliners, and even in instances of some, helping them get feature spots and headliner spots. So he's helped launch some careers, and he certainly was part of the launches and really the whole arc of comedy for people like Chris Rock and Norm Macdonald and gosh, so many that I could talk about, Jimmy Walker as well. So I think you're going to enjoy hearing from Fred Pozin, not just in and of himself, but as a person who really understands backstage, behind the scenes in the entertainment industry and in comedy specifically. But before we get to him, I thought maybe I'd share something interesting, maybe something provocative and something good. On the interesting, I don't know, I've been having conversations with my 14-year-old daughter about Taylor Swift. Of course, to say she's in the news, she is the news. Obviously not just her music, not just her concerts, not just the movie that's now a concert, but just cultural things about her and who she's dating and where she shows up and where she doesn't show up. And to me, that's fascinating. I happen to like her. I don't know if that's blasphemy to neither love her or hate her. I don't know her enough to do either of those things. Shake It Off is a great song to get me out of any doldrum. There's things about her that I like and love, but I would say, and again, hope I don't make any enemies here. And I've had this conversation with my daughter, who's a really good singer. My daughter, who does, school plays and understands, what it takes to be a performer, not at the highest level, but she understands it's not just something you do. You have to work at. And I said, what is it that you think, that Taylor Swift is, what is her greatest talent? And where we ultimately arrived and where she helped me arrive is that she's not the best singer in the world, probably not the best songwriter. I don't know if she plays an instrument, to be honest. So I'm going to say not the best instrumentalist, not the best dancer. She's not the prettiest. She's not any of those things. And yet, there's people that would take bullets for her and would disagree with everything I just said to some extent. But what she does is she resonates with an audience in a way that is, just unique. And it manifests, the consummate person that is to some degree authentic, but also finds a voice. And in her case has done it a few different times. And in her case, primarily with teenage girls of different generations. That is to say, people that were teenagers in one era loved her. And now people who are teenagers in another era love her. And for some of the same reasons and some different reasons. And that is a talent. Right. And so she doesn't have to be the best at any of those other things. There are people that are the best at those things and aren't nearly as marketable or as attractive or as interesting, at least from a mass popularity sense as she is. And I don't take away from that at all. Who would I be to do that? But I admire it. And I appreciate it. And I look forward to continuing to see what she does next that is unique. but also combines all of those things that make her just feel like people understand her and understand the voices that they're experiencing within themselves. And then she gives voice to it in music and entertainment and culture. And the fact that she's making billions of dollars at it, I don't have a single problem with. There's certainly people out there that are making millions and billions doing things that one could judge more harshly than what she does. So maybe that's interesting. I hope that's interesting for you. I want to share something provocative with you. At least it was to me. I have a handful of mentees. I always have mentors and mentees in my life. I think we should do that for life. And one of the mentees I was with recently, I was having a lunch, and she said, let me ask you this. She said, can money buy happiness? Do you think money can buy happiness? And she's a young graduate student who hasn't really launched her career in that sense yet, but is certainly on a path to success. And I asked her, well, you answer it for me first. What do you think? And she gave me a version of, I definitely think that money can buy happiness. And this is a person who's not, she was raised, not the richest and certainly not the poorest. So I don't suppose she's struggled monetarily. And, I also don't suppose she's been, jetting around the world on a private boat. So kind of, on the upper end, but not Kardashian quality rich. And she thought for sure money could buy happiness. Didn't offer a lot of caveats there. And I thought for a little bit and ultimately arrived at, no, I don't think money can buy happiness. How do I know that? Because there's lots of rich people who are unhappy. And then there's people who we would call poor, both in our country and in other countries, who are some of the happiest people I've ever met. So that can't be so. Money can't buy happiness. I do think the absence of money, or the absence of sufficient money, poverty, if you will, can buy unhappiness, or can lead to unhappiness. It doesn't necessarily dictate that you will be unhappy. For the reasons I said earlier, there are plenty of people that live very, very poorly in other countries, and if you go on mission trips or what have you, or interact, you feel like they're cheering you up. But I do think insecurity that comes from being a person without sufficient means and being a person that can't provide for your family can certainly lead to unhappiness. But I think there's plenty of problems that come with money. And so that's how I approached it. I'd wonder how you approach it. It was an interesting question, I thought, and one that I think we should all contemplate, as we do tend to spend a lot of time thinking about how to make money and on the thing that makes money for us, and as if money can buy happiness. So what do I have? What do I have that's good? There's so many good things in the world, and obviously we spend a lot of time looking at things that are less than good. That's what the news covers. If it bleeds, it leads, as they say. But there's a lot of good news out there, so I wanted to feature a little bit of it. I found a story. I was reading a story about a man and a young boy, actually in 9th grade at W.T. Woodson High School in Annandale, Virginia, who was awarded a $25,000 grand prize as a winner of the 2023 3M Young Scientist Challenge. And his name is Heman, Heman, Bekele, or Bekel, Bekele. And this young man came up with a treatment for melanoma in the form of a bar of soap. And you can Google him. 14-year-old invents soap for treating cancer and wins top honor. That's a pretty cool thing. It's really reminds us, certainly the children are our future, that they're capable of great things, even as we see them spending a lot of time, it seems, on social media and on computers. Don't know about this young man's usage, but whatever he was doing led him to this incredible actual scientific finding that will reduce the incidence of cancer with certain people, and something that we'll use that money to study further. So there you have it. Something interesting, something provocative, and something good. Now, this is me talking to Fred Pozin. Fred Pozin, welcome to the My First Rodeo podcast.
Well, thank you. Great being here. Great you breaking me in on a podcast. So thank you.
You get to do a second chance and you get to say things differently. Fred, you were with me when I broke into comedy, and you actually helped a lot of people in that stage of their career. So it's got to be an exciting time of reflection for you. You've been away from the comedy zone for a little while, having sold it after, 31 years?
A little more than that, actually.
Okay.
But yes, and it was great watching people grow into comedy. I'm so thrilled about folks' success like yourself and others who have stuck with it and said, hey, this is what I really like to do is get out on a stage and bare my soul to people that I don't know and hopefully get someone to laugh at what I'm getting ready to tell them. So
the perfect person, at least, as I've become sort of a person that studies the history of comedy and comedy clubs, which is gone through a certain life cycle and then maybe it's going through another one. But, the successful ones, it seems to me, are people like yourself that are not comedians, maybe didn't even grow up in comedy, but have an appreciation for comedy, and then for the business of running, a comedy club, as opposed to, it seems like there's a lot of people that get into it because they are comedians and they want a venue or they want to monetize it in a different way. Let's talk about your first rodeo. How on earth did you get into owning a comedy club?
Well, and to follow up on what you were saying, and then certainly we'll go down that pathway with you, is I find there was three type of people that owned or operated comedy clubs. One was usually a comedian who said, you know what, I know better than these people running it, and they're just out for the money. I'm going to show them. And then they realized after writing enough checks that this is an expensive endeavor to get into. Obviously, there were people who only did it for the money. They could care less about anything else. And then you found there were people somewhere in between that had a love affair for comedy and loved the art form of comedy. And then, of course, understood business and how to run a business.
Yeah.
When you asked about how I got into it, it was originally a business play.
Sure.
I had a personal like for comedy, but you got to be careful as a business person trying to suggest that what you like to do or what you like to have and what you can make a living at are two different things. But at the time I had a high energy dance club, and the world of high energy dance clubs was creating a lot of liability and other issues that I said, you know what, I've got to find a different, form of entertainment to go in this room. Comedy, I said, this is a piece of cake. There's only one comedy club in town at the time. I said, I don't have to compete against 30 other clubs, having ladies' night and this night and that night, and basically having to struggle marketing wise to be able to make a living. And I said, comedy must be easy. Well, I found out comedy is not easy. It's a lot more difficult. It's a lot more marketing to it. And it's not about competition because comedy competes against entertainment. Mm-hmm. And really what you're after is the entertainment dollar. So got into it. A friend of mine actually was a booking agent, and we had a great relationship, and we began from there. Unfortunately, I found as the years moved on, the change in comedy is what turned me off a little bit, because in the beginning years, probably my first 15 plus years, it was truly the art form of comedy. Mm-hmm. Michael Fried walked in, great guy, talented guy. I just needed to tell the world you were there.
Right.
When they came in, they'd see you and they'd go, oh my God, this guy's terrific.
And they didn't have to be coming there to see Mike Fried. They're coming there to see comedy that night.
That's right. So, we spent 15 plus years convincing people that we had great talent. Just come to see the talent. Trust us.
Sure.
They will come. Well, then the world changed a little bit, and Jacksonville grew up a little bit more, and people saw other ways to spend their money. And so you did have to go out and buy big talent and bring bigger talent in order to fill seats. And as we say in the industry, putting butts in seats.
Right.
And how do you put butts in seats? So unfortunately, there were some wonderful comedians who said, why are you not booking me anymore? Well, you're not filling seats.
Yeah.
And they'd go, but I'm a talented comic. Absolutely. You're the best comic, but the world doesn't know that. And I don't know how to tell them.
And that's even pre-social media, pre-YouTube. Right. People were already getting picky about who they wanted to come see.
Well, I think it was really radio that changed comedy. If I had to really harken back, radio reached a point where radio disc jockeys became program directors. And in the beginning years when they were radio disc jockeys, they were forced to put comics on the air every week because comedy clubs were paying them money.
I see.
And then eventually when those radio disc jockeys became program directors, they said, we do not like live comics. They're not funny. They're not good. And part of that is the interview. Most live comics or comedians have material, but they don't want to expose their material to the mass audiences. They're afraid someone's going to steal their material.
Right.
So they go to a radio station. They don't want to do their jokes they would do on stage. And so they would sit there. Well, the radio disc jockey would try to do an interview and it would become boring and nobody liked it. And everybody walked home. The comic felt good because he did what he was obligated to do by contract. The radio disc jockey did what he or she had to do because their company said you have to do it to make the money, but nobody was happy.
Yeah. So the first big hit you think, and in your experience, is just the dynamics with the disc jockeys becoming producers and not having an appetite for bringing the comedians in.
Absolutely. I think that and the change when radio stations started to be gobbled up around the countryside, and now instead of having a private radio station in town owned by one owner or a couple of stations, now all of a sudden you got a big conglomerate who owns 5 or 6 or 7 stations and now mandates what's going to happen in Jacksonville, Florida, in Atlanta, Georgia, Texas, wherever,
right.
And saying, here's the program, here's how we're going to do things now.
Mm-hmm.
Cut out the talk. Just do more music.
So that happens, and then there's more and more competition within Jacksonville and other cities that have comedy clubs for the entertainment dollar, which is a limited asset. And so people stop coming to comedy clubs just to see 3 pretty good comedians that they've never heard of. Now they want to see people that used to be on Saturday Night Live or that were on this sitcom. It may not be the funniest person in the world, or at least at this season of their life, but it's a recognizable person. We really liked that show. Remember that skit they used to do?
Well, that always got me too. That I have these 3 talented individuals on stage, and you're going to pay $25 to see all 3 of them, or you're going to spend $50 to see this one comic and 2 other entertainers who really don't want to be there and don't even know they're in Jacksonville, Florida. It didn't make sense to me, but people would pay $50 and the room would be packed. And then these 3 terrific comics, they'd pay $25 and you barely could fill the room.
Yeah. And again, that's all happening before the things that changed it even more. And that is Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. I mean, even since you've been out of it, it's gone through another generational change where, I mean, there's people that are phenomenons. I don't know how close you continue to follow comedy, probably quite a bit since it's a passion of yours, who they are simply known as YouTubers. And it's not my job to say whether they're funny or not funny, but they haven't paid their dues in the usual sense that a comedian would have. And but they can put butts in seats.
Well, that's what we started seeing happening. And probably for the last 10 plus years that I had the club, that's exactly was individuals who I didn't think were as talented, but got lucky, obviously was able to get on social media, was able to make a one wonder hit of some sort, ran into a contest and got a quick television, 30-minute show, and only had to come up with 15 or 20 minutes of material and everything was great. Yeah. Now all of a sudden they go to tour the countryside and have to do a 45-minute set, and they basically have 20 minutes of material.
Yeah, or there's this guy, Matt Rife, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, who actually was at the Comedy Zone in the past year. And since that time, became a phenomenon. He was on the way. Right. Now he's playing coliseums, and he pretty much does crowd work for. He's a good-looking guy. He does a lot of stuff that focuses on the way he looks, but he can work a crowd really well. Not necessarily funny in a traditional sense, but his crowd loves it, and you're seeing more and more of that.
Well, and that's the thing, the older comics, what I said to them is, one, you had to get a social media footing and you need to get out there in the world, and that they kept saying, I don't understand that world. I said, well, then you need to find somebody who does and help you with that, because if you don't get out there, no one's going to know who you are. You do have to find who your audience is. And you and I have talked about that before, that you have to find what gives you legs, what makes it work for you. It's not so easy sometimes, especially as a younger comic, just doing wherever you can to find a stage. You're at the mercy of whoever is headlining that night or leading that night, because that person's bringing the audience and you're just showing up and filling a void of time. Yeah,
well, that's true. And if you want to develop a particular voice, and then again, you and I've had this conversation, because at least my the people I emulate or would like to try to emulate are the Mitch Hedbergs, the Dimitri Martins, the Steve Wrights, who are, relatively deadpan, kind of intellectual jokes. Some people like that style. Some people don't like that style. It's not a great style for an opener, which is what you have to be before or if you ever become a headliner. And so I've had to develop a bigger personality for my opening stuff than I would naturally do if I had an audience that was coming to see me. That's not going to happen unless you pay your dues.
Well, you had to pivot, and frankly, just like doing interviews, young man and I were talking about that a little earlier, that to do a radio interview, a radio show, to do podcasting, you have to write material dedicated to this show.
Sure.
Okay. It may not be who you are.
Right.
It may not be part of your set, but you need to do that, because if people expect to laugh, then the good news is, for me, no one expects to laugh. So the bar is pretty low for me. But for if you're on my comedian sitting across from you, your listeners want to laugh. They want to have something to take home with them.
Yeah.
And you got to write that.
And as you know, I think you'll agree anyway, there are a lot of comedians that are not terribly funny people. Some are really, really funny and good to hang out with, particularly with other comedians. And you were in the inner circle there. But, sometimes the conversations are kind of tortured. Sometimes they're tortured souls. If you're asking them to go do radio at 6 o'clock in the morning, that's not the best time for a comedian. And so you're telling someone, when someone finds out you're a comedian, you often hear say something funny. Well, that's impossible. That's not how comedy works. And I think they struggle with that.
Well, and I think, as you know, and I think that's what your listeners think too. Unfortunately, most people think comics are naturally funny, can, do a joke, on a dime, just tell me a funny joke. Well, that's not who most comics are. Most comics, the comedy is written, it's scripted, as you know, it's tested, it's worked on. Every word is looked at. Do I need to say that? There's just a lot going into it. So they're not. And off stage, they're definitely not naturally funny.
Right.
I mean, they're not sitting in the back room cutting jokes. Some are more pleasant people. A lot of comics are introverted.
Yeah.
They come out of their shell on that stage, but put them behind stage, and many of them have walked by you before behind that stage and didn't say two words. And you're going, how is this person, the same person standing on that stage who was so likable and funny and all that, and gets off that stage and just clams straight up? Yeah. Well, that's just the nature of the personalities that go into it.
Yeah, very much. I mean, that's been a learning experience for me when I've opened for some of the folks that come through town. It's happened on 3 occasions where, as they come off, having done their headliner set, and then I finish closing the show and come back out, they're still backstage, and sometimes in tears, sometimes in a position that looks a little prayerful. But there's, introverts, as I understand the definition, is people that, lose energy being around other people. Mm-hmm. So they have to refuel. I don't think I'm that way, but certainly I've been around some of the national headliners that, after doing a show, even after doing a great show, going out and shaking hands with the audience would almost be impossible for them.
Well, that's the thing. And, you see that at some points, but I will tell you that there's 2 things that were always thrilling to me about having a club. And that was the energy after a show, mm-hmm. and watching the energy as people leave, knowing that we found the right audience for the right comedians. So there was just a high energy level. And 2 was the ability for people who could touch their favorite artist, right, shake hands, take a picture with individuals that they probably would have never had that opportunity. Definitely would never have had that opportunity in a large venue, mm-hmm. but in a small venue, to take this person who was their idol, who they've seen on TV or watched their movies or whatever else, to be able to go up and stand in line and take a picture with them and say hello to them was thrilling to them. And you just see the smiles on their faces, and that picture is now hanging on the wall in their homes. Yeah. Yeah. And that's neat to hear your insight on that, because you not only got to
do that repeatedly every week for all those years, but you got to bring that to other people. Sometimes one time they came to your club just to see, Norm Macdonald, and they never came back. And then other times, people came regularly and you got to give them that experience.
Well, it was thrilling to watch people have that experience. Of course, there were some along the way that were kind of odd, the Steve-O's of the world that, the people that wanted the pictures couldn't get in the club, but would stand outside because they were 15 years old and couldn't wait to get an autograph and a picture with Steve-O. So.
Yeah. No, that's right. It's, I don't know. It's like a time machine. I think for some people, I've certainly experienced that. I got to work. I think one of the first sets you let me open up for was Dom Herrera. And obviously I'd seen him forever. He'd been around before I was born, doing comedy. And so, yeah, to see him, let alone share a stage with him was, just surreal.
And there was a lot of guys. A lot of times when I do bookings and see comedians, I'm going, how did I get this one? I mean, how would this comic show up in Jacksonville, Florida, to a 300-seat comedy club? But as you said earlier, they're working on material. They're trying to develop more material. They need to be in the hinterlands. I don't want to say Jacksonville's a hinterland, but sometimes we are for comics. It's not a New York or a Dallas or an LA. But they've got to work out this material, especially if they're going to be on a large stage and or they're going to be on television. They have to make sure the material works and is right. People say, why didn't that comic do a theater? Or why doesn't he do an arena? Well, let me tell you, if a joke doesn't work, as you've always heard me say, you could fail in a 300-seat venue and everything is fine. The world doesn't come to an end. You get to a venue that's got 3,000 seats or 8,000 seats, and you say a joke and it doesn't work. Yeah. That dead air is horrific for a
really
comedian.
Uncomfortable. Plus, I think there's, not that I've played a lot of arenas, but I think there's more, you could just sense what's happening in a smaller room and have something, you can influence the result more in a bigger room, in a coliseum or even a large theater. You got to work to the back of the room and then wait for the laugh, hopefully to come from the back to the front or the front to the back, and then figure out how to time your joke with that in mind.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes that laughter doesn't come. I know the first lesson I learned about comedy when I was just I called myself a young owner at the time. I thought it was great at the time. God rest his soul, Mayor Hazuri. I'm sorry, he's no longer with us, a great man.
Jacksonville Mayor.
Yeah, he had downtown, we used to do out in Metropolitan Park, we used to do a concert series. And he was kind enough, because of our friendship, I said, look, during the intermission, when the bands go away, do you mind if I bring some of my comics down here to do comedy for the folks, just to fill the time? Oh, sure. And his people were gracious about it. So I brought 3 of my comics down, and one of my comics was an old seasoned comedian at the time. And he said, it doesn't work. And I said, oh, it has to work. People are having a great time. The bands are energizing. You're going to get on stage in between. Well, it was one of my biggest failures. Number one, because the sound effect for a band is different than for a comedian. Well, when your voice goes out and comes back at you, so the joke you just said comes back at you 45 to 50 to a minute later, it doesn't work. As well as you find out that you can't control the people. Once the band is done, they want to go to the beer tent and they're not listening to you. And most comics need an audience to work off of.
All those. But I mean, anybody who follows comedy or watches The Magnificent Miss Maisel knows that comedy got started with acts going on before and in between music acts. I'm nostalgic for that, even though I wasn't around when it happened the first time. Why doesn't that work anymore?
Comedy needs to be before music. Music's too high energy. Comedian is building his or her set. They're trying to develop the set and build the energy level to the end at their closer. And that music, builds the audience level up. I see a lot of comics try to go out on stage. Young comics always laugh who listen to their idols and they go, oh, I can come out to music. Well, the music bar sets the tone of the room pretty high. And then this comedian comes out with the first joke and it dies.
Sure.
And it kills the room at that point. You can't compete
Yeah,
with music.
it's a different thing. Yeah, I mean, obviously some of the urban comics use the music. When I'm at a place and they use music, which I don't fight. I like it in a sense, but I simply focus on that cognitive dissonance between that really cool song and then this little nerdy white comedian who's in front of them now. And I remark on that, and that's my first joke. But yeah, it is the whatever, the 8,000-pound gorilla in the room. If you don't say something about it, it's like, why'd that ludicrous song lead that little old white guy? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you have to have something to work with the song. You have to have your energy level up when you hit that stage.
Right.
Which for a lot of comics, that doesn't work for their comedy.
Yeah, you put the burden up there for you.
Right. And so once now the audience is set up here, and now the comedian has to jump up here. Mm-hmm. It's that pull-up bar. Yeah. Once you do that, now your comedy has to go even higher.
Yeah.
So do you have more material to follow that up with, which most people don't? So to me, it doesn't work for most comics, and I don't like when they do it.
That's a good point. I've never heard you say that, but I know that you didn't generally use music unless the headliner wanted music. And now I know why. I don't shy away from weird forums, even though I make a lot of first mistakes and then I make it again and again in terms of shows I've booked. But one of the ones that I've done a couple years in a row, we've modified it, is with the minor league hockey team in town. And there's 8,000 people in the arena, mm-hmm. and they have a room afterwards for us to do a 300-person show. That works pretty well. What doesn't work well is the first time they had us come out on the ice between periods to tell the audience about the show afterwards. And I had invited two other comics, Brian Ziola, who you know, and Jen Weeks. It turned out to be fine, not because of anything I did. I was going to go out and tell a couple jokes, let Brian tell a couple jokes, let Jen tell a couple jokes. Well, Jen is let's just say she's large and she's not an ice skater. So she made it funny, just her trying to get out on the ice. That was good. I was trying to tell a couple jokes. You couldn't get the sound quality working. You're speaking. We were in the center of the ice rink. Brian was much smarter than me. He just starts going, "Let's go ice." So he knew how to get the crowd. I lost him.
So you guys didn't have enough creds to be able to get the Zamboni to go out there on the center of the ice?
I think we were competing with the Zamboni, which was much funnier than us at that moment. Well,
you find that the only other failure, well, I've had lots of failures in life, but that was my second failure, was being involved for many years with the Gator Bowl. Mm-hmm. I asked at the time, a gentleman named Rick Catlett, I said, Rick, let me bring some comics when the two teams are together at this reception the evening before the game, and they'll do comedy. So we were up in one of the larger venues there at the stadium, and the stage was in the middle, and they had one team on one end of the room and one team on the other end of the room, and a few alumni in between, and we were right in front of the bar.
Yeah.
Okay. Which I always thought being near the bar as a comedy show would get me a lot more attraction. I've never seen my comics sweat so hard trying to get people's attention.
Yeah. Because
they were obviously there for the football game and for the camaraderie dealing with football. Comedy was just not going to happen.
No, there's a lot of what we call them hostage situations, and you've never had to deal with that. But I'm sure you've heard us complain about it because you did provide the one Class A comedy club in town. But if we want to work the other nights, we need to go to bars or something that's converted to comedy for the night or hasn't, just sort of foisted comedy on their guests. And most of us are happy to at least initially, to have a mic and the appearance of an audience. But forcing comedy on people that haven't asked for it and haven't paid for it almost never works.
That is absolutely correct. But the other side of that, and you've been to those shows, when you find that it's your audience at the right show and you hit that ball out of the ballpark.
Oh, sure.
Your graduation show, you hit the ball out of the ballpark, and it's just the adrenaline and the rush that you had afterwards, because when it works and that crowd loves you and the energy in that room is there, it's a thrill.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's, it keeps you coming back. I've never been a baseball player, but I've always admired how best baseball players, strike out more often than they succeed by a long shot, like 70% of the time. If you did that, if you succeeded 30% of the time in baseball, you'd be in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. Comedy's about like that. And it's that occasional good joke or 50% of the time a good joke that gets the reaction you want from the audience you want that allows you to have, just overcome everything else that would, when you bomb, when you're standing up there with nothing but a microphone, and you saw plenty of us do that day in and day out. There's no logical reason you wouldn't just go crawl in a hole and never come back. But it's those success moments that keep you coming back. Well,
and again, that's the pride I have in folks like yourself and others who do that, because you come back and it's admiration, because people think it's easy. It is not easy bearing your soul on a stage and nobody laughing.
Yeah.
And you put your life out there and that's what happens. But the other side of it is, and I always love the graduation shows for that, and those moments in time when the person makes it.
Yeah.
And what is that time? That time is just, it clicks on all cylinders.
Yeah.
And you that joke that you've been saying for months and got an okay laugh, and all of a sudden tonight, just the laughter scale, the meter went through the roof, and you go, how did that happen?
Yeah.
Well, you said one new word in there that you've never said before. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, that joke is now hysterical. What makes tonight different than the night before and the show before that and the show before that? It's that one night that the set is perfect. The audience is the right audience, and it's just firing on all cylinders. You're in a good mood. You didn't just come from work. I need more caffeine. I've got to have more green machine. Yes. And that, it's just that perfect moment, and you're just energized.
And then you chase that the rest of your career, trying to do it again. Even, you do the 7:30 show, and then you try to get it at 10:30, and 10:30 crowd's different. They've been drinking, and they're not going to be as good audience, generally speaking.
Yeah, alcohol doesn't tend to help laughter much.
I think 2 drinks does, 4 drinks does not.
Yeah, the sloppy drunks in the back don't help, nor does a room full of comics help either, because that certainly doesn't present the best audience for you.
No. So people have gotten to know you now through this conversation, and how you've helped about at least hundreds of comics, some very, very successfully, some that checked it off their box and had that opportunity, each equally as important. But what I want to talk about are the comedians that were so loyal to you, it seemed to me, I'm sure not everybody, big names that people would know, that you either were providing a venue for early in their career, before they made it big. I think Chris Rock would fall into that category. And then other people who was later in their career. I'm thinking of like Jimmy Walker. Again, maybe he was there earlier in his career too. I got to see him and work with him later in his career, and come back. I think he would come back every other year. And we're just so, I'm sure they came back for the paycheck. I'm sure they came back for whatever else they negotiated. But I really got a sense that they were coming back when they didn't have to because of you. So talk about sort of that bond that you formed with particular comedians and really with the comedic community in general.
Well, comics are like anyone else. You want a comfort level. They do 30 to 40 cities a year, week to week. I mean, a typical life of a comedian, that's a halfway decent name and recognition. They're going out on a Wednesday, Thursday, leaving their home, packing their bags, jumping on an airplane, going to Jacksonville, Florida, Des Moines, Iowa, Atlanta, Georgia, Charlotte, wherever the weekend takes them. They're doing a show on Thursday through Saturday, Thursday through Sunday, packing their bags at the end of the weekend, and then flying home, spending 3-4 days with their family, and going again. If they're involved with anything else, movies, television, whatever, they're running to go do that on Monday morning, whatever it may be. So they have lives. It's a tough life on the road. I don't envy it at all. And in the beginning years when they first started out, it was a horrible life on the road. It's, you're living hotel to hotel to hotel. You don't have much of a life at home. You're barely getting home most weekends because you're just trying to earn a living and put a couple bucks in your pocket at that point. Those were the beginning years of comedy when you got to really meet folks out there who were climbing that ladder and building those relationships. So over the years, you build relationships with comedians because they feel like at least you're an oasis for the weekend for them. They know who you are. You're going to take care of their needs. You're going to make them feel at home and comfortable, and they feel comfortable with you. You're going to tell them straight. You're going to give them the truth, and you're going to pay them at the end.
Yeah, which is not a foregone conclusion at every club, but I get the sense that from day one, if you had to come out of your pocket, you were making sure you honored your obligations to the comics.
Well, and that's what it came down to. Plus, you know what? They felt good around you. And some of them had very interesting lives. I enjoyed them as much as they enjoyed me, and then others were very, to themselves. You never talk to them. You had some that would literally get off stage and go lock themselves in the room and then come back out again. And then you had some who really just enjoyed people, and wanted to sit down. Some of them I was amazed because, I didn't grow up with their way of life. I had some comics who get on stage. I didn't understand half the material they were doing because that wasn't the life I grew up in.
Sure.
But then they'd come off stage and we'd be talking about the stock market and what's going on in business. And I'm like, wow. Yeah. I mean, I didn't even see this coming, that this comic understands that. There's some comics that do live dual lives, I call them. The person off stage was not the same person on stage. They were a totally different person. That I had some comics that really their business side of them was pretty interesting to me because I thought they didn't understand it. But boy, when they got off stage, they understood every bit of that. And they made sure their people walked in step with that. Yeah. Some of the ones over the years I watched, when their careers, they didn't have much of a career. They were different people. When their careers blew up, they didn't want to talk to you.
Right. I'm sure there were plenty of those that would not come back or what have you.
Well, and I had some that did come back because their careers failed over time. Look, comedy clubs get these talent on the way up the ladder and on the way down the ladder.
Right. It's not at the prime of their career unless that happens to be the peak of their career.
Well, or unless that's what they chose, but most of the time that's not. It's, they're working on other things. They're certainly benefiting them. But I had some comics that literally in the beginning were terrific, relationship wise. Then all of a sudden when their career started to take off, it's like they didn't know who you were. Yeah. But it was amazing when their career failed, they seemed to know you again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when all the people that were around them only for their money bailed out. They were happy about that. And I had many a comic who would talk about the money side of it, and you'd tell them, look, if it was all about the money, you wouldn't be in the business.
Yeah, there's better ways to make money.
There's better ways, right? Yeah. And that's kind of the logic some of them. So the ones that you really befriend are the ones who realize that, you're really a fairly decent person. And they would think I am, we would have a great base of discussions about that, and life would be good.
Talk about some of the ones that you, consider friends in that sense, that you built friendships with and that you were real excited to see their success.
Well, one of the guys that I see several of them, look, Larry the Cable Guy was a road comic. I call him a road dog, for many, many years, lived down in Sanford, Florida. His career blew up on him, but was, just a nice guy, always was a nice guy, and I'm thrilled for his success. I knew Jeff Foxworthy in the beginning days of that, that was a typical, Tommy Davidson and Tommy was interesting to me because Tommy was one of those that I knew him before his career blew up. When his career blew up, it was like he didn't want to talk to me or anybody else. And then when his career started sliding the other way, now all of a sudden, he knows who you are again. But then since then, I think he's become a better person. I think he's become a better comic. Yeah. And he knows he has been.
Right.
It just, you got to get out of the ego of it and that. So, those work. I think comedy is an art form, and I don't think everyone enjoys every bit of comedy. I didn't like every comedian that came in.
No, it'd be impossible to. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily correlate with the business side. Some of the ones that you probably liked the least filled the seats at $50 a seat too.
Well, in the beginning years, it was about the comedians I liked.
Right.
And then from that, in the middle years on, it had nothing to do with what I liked. It had to do with who was willing to buy tickets.
Right.
And, if I could fill a room, then I guess whether I like them or not doesn't really matter anymore.
Yeah.
Which is not, I guess, why I really got into the business per se, as much as it is for business. But, you want to like good people. You want good people who are funny, that are going to, really bring the audience out, that is going to laugh at them and certainly willing to spend some money at the same time.
Yeah.
Comedy right now is an expensive night out for people. And, that's one thing I used to pound into my staff constantly is, it's an expensive endeavor for folks now. Even a $50 ticket, which is still a cheap ticket. It's $75 today to $100 anymore and theaters and arena, if not more.
Sure.
But even if you said 50 and a couple, that's $100 plus dinner, plus appetizers, plus a couple of beers. That's an expensive night out.
Yeah. No, they expect something. That's for sure. Talk about Jimmy Walker, because he's one you worked with probably from the beginning to the end. I don't know if he was your last show, but he was he was there the last year, I'm pretty sure.
Jimmy, what a great guy. He's I really got to know Jimmy in his obviously in the later years, and just an interesting guy to sit down. The people that he knew in his career, still knows in his career. I mean, he was at the beginning days of comedy way back when.
Sure.
When comedy moved from New York to L.A.
Yeah.
I mean, Jimmy was all part of that. And when you look at the list of people Jimmy performed with, just amazing.
And wrote for and even managed, right?
Absolutely.
David Letterman, Jay Leno, I want to say.
Yeah.
He wrote for them and even managed their early careers.
But then to see a guy of his stature and his talent at his age, and I hate to put age in there, but it is, you can still get up there and do a show that most young comics can't keep up with.
Yeah, no, he's a road dog for sure. I mean, and I get the impression, because you were kind enough to strongly encourage your headliners to come talk to us newer comics, and he was a great one. He would always do that when he was in town. That he chose that path, of doing clubs like the Comedy Zone, the one that you owned, instead of trying to figure out what it would take to build that reputation to play large arenas. I don't know that he would have turned down the money or that path, but he certainly didn't go out looking for it like a lot of comedians do.
Yeah, I mean, I think he found himself a niche in that. I tried to get Jimmy back every year. He wouldn't come back every year. Right. He was always one who said every other year. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm going to do. Even to this day, he was like, Pozin, I'm doing every other year.
Didn't want to saturate the market.
Didn't want to saturate the market. He's what I call an old school comic. There's just certain ones that are old school that believe in certain things, and he was one of them. But just a sweetheart of a guy. Just he's I guess in comedy I would say would be one of my idols. Yeah. Just because he just has the history down of comedy. I mean, he is the roots of where comedy in the current form in our country, where it came from.
Oh yeah. And for young people who are listening, obviously if you're not familiar with Good Times and Dynamite and Jimmy J.J. Walker, which is something he never exploited, probably to his financial detriment, but that is who he was. He was one of the first, that was the first black family that a lot of white people met. Right. And he's a big part of that. And it's such an icon in that sense, and still continues to get up every week and tell jokes.
Well, and it still fascinates me. He's still on the road. I mean, he's not a young chicken anymore, but he's out there, and he loves the road. Oh my God, he is an absolute road dog, and he loves being out there every week. It just makes him feel young, and I guess it's that's where he's at today.
I guess. We'll talk about the Chris Rock experience. I only know the part where he shows up, at least as it's been represented to me, unexpectedly. I'm guessing it wasn't unexpected to you.
Right. Chris, this was obviously a number of years ago when we had the Super Bowl in town. But Chris, I'd had him as a young comic. I had his brothers, Tony, and he had a younger brother. And the youngest brother actually is more talented, I think, than everybody in the family. Wow. So I had Chris many years ago, and I was had a great relationship with his agent. And he was coming to town because I think shortly hereafter he was was it the Emmys or something? He was headlining. Oh, yeah. And he was working on some new material. So his agent called me up, and then his road manager called me up and said, look, he wanted to work on some material while he's there. Can he come down to the club? And I said, sure. And then, of course, as it all goes, well, we'll let you know in that. So I didn't know. And of course, they asked, don't tell anybody, because we don't want to alter the crowd. Right. We want him to have whatever crowd is in the room at that night. And I remember I was downtown here having dinner with the family, and I get the call from his road manager, and the road manager said, we're on our way to the club. I left a great steak on the plate, left my wife with other members of my family, and took off and ran to the club. And I met Chris behind the stage there. And I remember Danny Johnson was on stage, and Chris said, look, I want no introductions. If you don't mind, I just want to walk out. Yeah. And it's like, well, Chris Rock, I guess somebody will notice who he is, Sure. And I got to tell you, there was probably 150, 200 people in the audience that night. He first tapped Danny Johnson on the shoulder to ask Danny if it's okay if he, does the dance right now, takes over and does a little comedy. Of course, I think Danny about fainted at that moment. And he took over, and the crowd was like, oh, my God. Of course, all the phones. Everybody was picking up their phone, not only taking pictures, but calling everybody. Of course, they didn't realize he was only doing 15, 20 minutes and he's gone.
That's it.
But it was it's a thrill. Those are the thrills along the way that you get. Certain people, there's certain comics that you just say, wow, they're just part of the fabric of of my life in comedy. So who would think they would want to come?
Yeah.
And then they show up.
Absolutely. Who are some of your other favorites? I mentioned Norm Macdonald earlier. Obviously passed away not too long ago. Certainly one of my favorites. What was he like to work with?
He was. Norm was interesting. The Saturday Night Live comics, I call them the SNL comics. It's very different for audiences, and I guess if you could put them all into one basket, all the SNLs, they were probably the biggest challenge as a club, because what they do on SNL on Saturday night is not what they do on stage. Bob Saget, God rest his soul. I mean, Bob is a blue comic.
Right.
A lot of comics are not squeaky clean. They're not doing skits. And then all of a sudden they come to a comedy venue and you want to hear the skits that they do on Saturday night.
Yeah.
That's not who they are. That is not their comedy. And so usually it's putting a square peg in a round hole, and it doesn't work. So most audiences leave at the end of the night not feeling like they have gotten their value of the night after the performance is done.
That's interesting. I wonder if that changed. Certainly I remember I was actually at the delirious Eddie Murphy show. I was in either junior high or high school, and why my parents let me go, I don't know. But I remember one of the first things he said was, if you came to see Saturday Night Live, you can get the F out of here right now. But in those days, you wouldn't necessarily know what Eddie Murphy's comedy was unless the album preceded the show. And in that case, they were recording the album. But nowadays, if you go to see an SNL person, you would think you would go and see at least something of what their comedy is on YouTube or otherwise before you show up.
You would think, but that doesn't always end up being the case. So, that's just one part. I'm not saying Saturday Night Live comics are by any means they're not talented, because they certainly are.
Sure.
But you have to know, is their comedy what I'm expecting to see? Because usually their stage comedy is much different than what they've got scripted on the show on a Saturday night.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And some of them, you don't have to say it, but some of them, they're gonna draw generally, and they could go through the motions. I've seen folks show up and just answer questions about what it's like to be on Saturday Night Live, and sometimes the audiences eat that up. It's not comedy, but people are getting what they paid for.
Well, you definitely don't want it to be a talk show, and it sometimes turns out to be that way because they don't have a lot of material.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's some of them that left the road, many years earlier, because their talents took them not only to Saturday Night Live, but to other types of production, whether it's television, whether it's movies, whatever. And then all of a sudden, 20 years later, they decide, geez, I'm going to try comedy again.
Yeah.
And, here we go. And then sometimes it doesn't work, because they find out they don't have a good solid 45 minutes,
Yeah, and they don't have people writing for them either.
They don't have people writing for them. They don't have the same material they used to. And then you have cases where people remember their early days of comedy, ask them to do that material again, and they can't remember it because it was so many years ago that they can't remember the joke anymore. Yeah,
I've never understood that. I've seen it. I've even seen Jim Gaffigan doing it now, where people will shout out jokes. They want them to do the Hot Pockets joke. And I mean, if I want to hear the Hot Pockets joke, I'll go listen to it. But it's not, to me, it's not like music where you want to hear Led Zeppelin play Stairway to Heaven. Mm-hmm. I want to hear Jim Gaffigan tell new jokes that are in the Jim Gaffigan voice.
Well, and that, you bring up a good point, and that's another part of comedy that people don't understand. How long it takes to write a joke and to develop a set. And let's say a set for most comics is 45 minutes to an hour. Well, if it's just pure writing on their own, usually that's a couple, 3 years sometimes. I mean, sure. It is not fast. Well, if I'm a comedian that crisscrosses the nation doing theaters and arenas, well, every year, if I want to bring that audience back, I have to have a whole new, set of material.
Right.
Well, how am I going to get that material? So they end up buying material from comics who are just good writers.
Yeah.
And working that new material in and practicing that material and putting it out there. So it technically isn't, it is their material now, but it wasn't written by them as their early days. And that's a frustration to them, but they get it.
Yeah.
They try to do the same jokes for 2 and 3 years. They just will lose their audience base.
Yeah. No, I guess that's right. So last thing I wanted to ask you about, something that people that aren't in comedy, or certainly that didn't own comedy clubs wouldn't necessarily know anything about, are writers. I was always amused on what some comedians would ask for. A writer would obviously be a contractual provision that says, I need to have this. It might be a case of Pepsi, but sometimes it's pretty weird things. Sometimes it related to their act. Sometimes it seemed like they were just jerking you around because to see what they could get. You seem to have a pretty consistent approach. If they wanted it, they could have it as long as it didn't bust the budget. What was your approach on that, and what were some of the funny ones that you might want to share?
Well, writers were interesting. I figured out after a while, especially the bigger the name artist, the longer the items you're required to do within the writer. Of course, with all the legal, whether it's contract or writers, and you being in the legal profession, I never let my lawyer ever see the contract or the writers, because they would tell me never sign these things,
right, because
it's written simply to benefit their management, their careers and who they are, and never to the club side at all.
No, they're not great legal documents.
No. But long and short, on the writer side of things, I find that most of the things placed in the writer was because somebody somewhere said no. And you start to figure that out after a while.
I got you.
Because you look at this shopping list of all the things they want and you go, why do you really care whether you have mustard in your tuna fish or mayonnaise in your tuna fish? And why do you have to have tuna fish every night?
Yeah.
Nobody likes tuna fish that much.
Or a new pair of sneakers, or what have you.
Well, and we had, as you know, one of those that
just one
that needed a brand new pair of Air Force One sneakers, size 8, and needed a new pair every night.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting shopping expedition. I had someone else who needed T-shirts, and I needed a new T-shirt for every show.
Right.
I had others who needed, new towels for every show, and, just certain specifics. Food, of course, was a gamut. Some were health food folks. I just learned after a while that don't fight the writer. Learn that pick your battles, and that is not one area to pick your battles on. That you're going to fight over a buck for a particular brand that they want. And that was the difficulty sometimes. Sometimes they wanted brands that weren't readily available.
Yeah, in Jacksonville.
And especially if they were in the health food, portions, and they needed a particular brand that was just obscure.
Yeah.
Maybe it was great in the Northeast or maybe in the West Coast, but no one's ever heard of it. And then you find out a lot of times when you really start to ask the question, you find out it's not that important to them.
Yeah.
They just happened to need it one day. They knew they could get it and the people wouldn't get it. And they just said, fine, then stick it in my rider. And they're forced to do it.
Yeah. We'll see what we get.
And so that kind of thing. I found some of them. I had one that was required so much, I'm not a health food guy. I mean, I do eat some of them, but some of them are foreign to me. I would just pick them up and take them to the health food store and we'd go shopping together. Just put it in the basket, what you want.
Yeah.
Because you'll know better than I did. And this particular comic thought I was the greatest guy in the world for doing that. Nobody else does that.
Yeah.
He was happy because I took him shopping. So every time he came to town, we'd go shopping. And I just found it was just a lot easier than for me to go and get things that I don't know what he really wants.
You must have been thrilled when they built the Whole Foods right next to your club.
Funny, this particular comic hates Whole Foods because he doesn't think that they are truly a natural food store. We'd actually go to Riverside. We used to go to Mandarin, but they're closed since.
Yeah.
But we had to go over to Riverside.
Over to Grassroots.
Yeah.
That's too funny.
And work out our schedule there. But he thought Whole Foods was just violating all the rules of the game.
Interesting. And I remember one, at least, and some of them were pretty interesting coming out of the pandemic, that we could do a whole show on things he had to do to get reopened. But I remember one guy wanted fans blowing not towards him to cool him off, but away from him to, I presume, blow the audience's germs back to them. So.
Yeah, and I never understood it. And it had to be a box fan.
Yeah.
Couldn't just be any kind of fan. It needed to be the old-fashioned square box fans.
Right. He did not take them with him, though. So you inherited, or your new owner inherited box fans.
Yeah. I gave them to somebody at one point. It's like, really? I'm going to go buy, $10 box fans because this, and it really was. He got upset because we had him turn the wrong way.
Oh.
I thought it was to cool him off. I thought maybe, the lights were too hot for him.
Yeah, you would think it would have something to do with the sound quality, an audience trying to listen to you over a box fan blowing in their face.
Yeah, well, that's the same comic who also left, I want to say $15,000-$20,000 in his room in cash.
Oh, I do remember that, and left some TV shows under questionable circumstances as well.
Yeah, so he wanted me to just kind of box it up and send it to him.
I do remember that,
and that was a real trying moment for me because there's the legalities of boxing up that much in cash and putting it in the U.S. Postal Service and saying, I'm going to mail it to you and hope it gets there is not something that I suggested. Maybe we'll just deposit it and I'll send him a check. He didn't want that. He needed the cash. It was in some territory that was not comfortable territory for his leadership or management, myself, and we finally figured out a way to do it legally because I was not going to do it his method.
Or at least it didn't expose you to illegality.
That's correct.
You don't know what was happening on the other end, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's too funny. Well, Fred Pozin, you really are a gift to the comedic community, certainly to the Jacksonville community. You helped a lot of comedians, including me, get started. And I know you're important to a lot of famous comedians that are still out there and to so many different audiences that may not even know your name, but got to have a fun night and a laugh and a chance to take a photo with a celebrity that they never would have seen if you didn't bring them to town. So thanks for all the gifts that you bestowed on us.
Well, thank you. And thank you for kindness to invite me today. You are really the man. I mean, you've raised $2.2 million to help those in underserved neighborhoods and others with their legal needs and help. So congratulations to you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for your encouragement. Doing it again this year, November 17th and 18th, and actually funded one endowment and moving on to an endowment to help senior citizens that are struggling with housing insecurity. So the Free to Run Challenge, November 17th and 18th. Check it out on freetorun.com.
Great.
But
thank you.
More importantly, thanks, Fred. I appreciate your friendship.
Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Fred Pozin is an amazing guy. Again, another person you wouldn't necessarily know unless you were in the national touring comedic community or in the local Jacksonville community, because he helped a lot of comedians get started. But just a neat guy. One thing we did not talk about is sort of the business purpose that he had, because he had a hotel and he had a conference center and he had this room, which I think he said in the interview was part of a dance club. And when that seemed to be more challenging than it was beneficial, that's when he pivoted towards the comedy club. And I'm sure some people knew his hotel and conference center for being a hotel and conference center, but it really was a Class A comedy club. And when I say Class A, I don't mean it's a luxurious place. I mean, it's exactly what you expect of a comedy club. It smelled like a little bit of beer, had some older carpet. It had a great stage and a decent enough sound system to have a person stand up there with a stool and do comedy to 300 people, 5 shows a week, Thursday through Friday, Thursday through Saturday rather, and sometimes on Sunday. And just really, really a neat place. If you have a local comedy club where you are, please support it, because to some extent, I do wonder what they're going to be in this phase of life where people can get unlimited comedy from Netflix and from YouTube and from TikTok. I hope that those tools will be used to support comedy. But in some ways, I think people, much like they sit home to watch football games and basketball games, are sitting home to watch comedy rather than going out and having that full experience of supporting local business, supporting local, regional, and nationwide comedy, and having that personal experience where you go there and you hang out with comedians and you laugh. And laughing is such good therapy, obviously. Don Morera, who I mentioned in the interview and I opened for, said laughing is the greatest medicine, except for medicine. Medicine's really the best medicine. But it's true, laughing is a really important way to diffuse, to decompress, to comment on things. It's a way to be ugly too, and certainly some people do that, and there is an audience for it. But whatever your flavor of comedy is, keep an eye out at your local comedy club or even comedy clubs that you could drive to. Don't just go to the arenas and the theaters, but go to the local comedy clubs because there's something special about them. And selfishly, I want to see them continue to exist. So I hope you enjoyed Fred Pozin. Do go to www.freed2run.com. I probably don't need to say the www anymore, do I? And see if you wouldn't want to get involved, at least support, donate, support a team raising money to help indigent senior citizens struggling with housing insecurity. We're doing a 24-hour run November 17th and 18th. Please listen to the My First Rodeo podcast. You're doing that right now. Good work. Thank you. Keep it up. Subscribe and pass it on, would you? Talk to you next week. Thanks. My First Rodeo.